when you focused on, yeah, just a couple thoughts come to mind. I guess first is that I wonder if you were gravitating back to finance because of the peace of mind you would get by understanding finance and being able to have some savings so that you could kind of, I think you mentioned in that article that once you have some savings in your life or some kind of net worth where maybe you can survive 6 months without working, maybe a year, maybe a year and a half or 2 years, you kind of get that peace of mind. So I wonder if you were just gravitating back to finance to capture that peace of mind that maybe you didn't have when you were younger.
Definitely, because yeah, I
And
went through that period of relative chaos, and then so when I stabilized, which was in a trailer park, I became a pretty heavy saver. So, for example, when I got birthday gifts or like holiday gifts, I would save it. And so I started investing in precious metals when I was like 8 or something like that. So I had dollars,
wow.
I had
Yeah.
little silver coin, and back then it was cheap, right? It was super cheap, and so I had dollars, I had little silver coins, I had a couple little half-ounce gold coins, and that was like my initial treasury. And so having savings felt good. And then
Oh, wow.
when I went to college, I went through a period where I had a negative net worth because I had savings, but then I had all these student loans, and that was this constant stress of just like, okay, I have this negative net worth, I have
Yeah.
to go make income now. And so, there's that kind of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, or there's also like your ability to think long term is partially influenced by how stressed you are in the near term. And so money again is a tool there where if you have savings and investments and cash flows and things like that that are passive, it allows you in some ways to think longer term as long as you don't let those things rule you, right? So if you get more money and then you have a constant urge to get even more money and you you
Mhm.
you constantly buy things, that's a trap that people fall into, where the more money they make, it's still like never enough. Versus if you continue to live lightly, build up your resources, then you have this long runway of savings and investments and cash flows. It allows you to take a step back and think, okay, how do I want to shape my life? How do I want to help others? How, so you get off of that kind of 3 to 6 month to year long thinking,
Mhm.
and you can think in 5 year increments because you have more of that freedom.
Mhm. Yeah, that's so important what you just said, because I think so many people in North America are maybe on that treadmill that they can't think beyond 3 to 6 months. And they're missing some of these big trends that you discuss that will catch them off guard 10 years from now. In one of your reports, how you talk about, I think in the 1940s, that after the 10-year cycle, their consumer goods were up like 90% in value. I think that was the stat that you put out there. And part of me fears that, wow, 10 years from now, people think things are expensive now, but perhaps they're going to be 90% more expensive at the end of this decade. And it's going to catch so many people off guard, but you can't really blame anyone because they're worried about the 3 to 6 months and they're not worried about 10 years from now. Right. So it's this constant kind of battle. When you said focus on your passion, how do you think you were able to take your passion and monetize it? Did you study like sales and marketing? Did you study putting together a website and how to get, traffic to the website? How did you go from that passion to now doing what you're doing? Was that an extra skill set that you had to develop, or did you just fall into it?
The short answer is yes. So part of it is luck because my passion happens to be investing and just studying global finance, which is just naturally a more lucrative field of inquiry than if I was
Sure.
interested
Yeah.
in art, for example. Now, but that doesn't mean that people can't, you can monetize just about anything. Just that some are they have more frictions than others that just incline towards higher margins or more saleability. But to answer your question, I did have to develop a semblance of marketing, and my personality is very non-marketing focused, right? So I'm an introvert. I don't like hard sells. And so I studied, content marketing, right? How to, say you never actually like basically, yeah, I studied, okay, how to build an email list, how to do search engine optimization. That was kind of my early, I had a small blog before I started this one, and it was just like an anonymous thing where I just kind of posted stock analysis and was kind of learning along the way. And I learned search engine optimization and building an email list and things like that, and how to make a product and sell a product. And that was kind of my trial, my long-term multi-year learning experience. So when I started Lyn Alden investment strategy, I already knew what I was doing in that regard. And I still had to learn new things like how to manage social media and things like that. And as a result, I've never, I never spent a dime on marketing. I don't have any of those like sales pages about like hard sales. I never post a tweet asking anyone to buy anything. It's purely that really super soft sales. It's just, okay, let me just provide a lot of value because inherently enjoy what I'm doing. I'm not, if my revenue was cut in half tomorrow, I would still be doing it, right? It's not for the money specifically, even though obviously you need to make a living, but it's not for the money. It's because I enjoy doing it. And as a result, it just kind of works out better than you expect. So my focus is on trying to do good content, trying to keep people coming back with, email lists and things like that, and then never hard selling them. Just kind of keep providing value and then saying, hey, I have this other thing if you want to buy it, but it's up to you. And so it's partially about finding a marketing strategy that fits with your personality and your style.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and it works. In that same article, you mentioned this. It says you have to get all of your financial house in order, not just a part of it. Do you remember that part of that article? Can you talk about that point?
I remember it roughly. Basically, so there's saving. Well, there's one is making a high enough income because that's one of the hardest parts is that people just don't make enough income over their basic needs to save a difference. So one is figuring out how to make more money or enough money to have both your lifestyle met and savings. That's one. And then two, controlling the expense side. And then three is investing. And a lot of people figure out one or two of those, whereas wealth creation happens when you get all three right. And I use the example of my father, where he totally nailed the first two, where he made enough money, he was very responsible with his expenses. He had like a perfect credit score. He like was, he had savings, but he didn't understand investing at all and didn't trust the stock market, didn't know how to invest. And so after decades and decades and decades, he never grew his wealth. It was always just kind of this linear thing.
Yeah, got it.
And I apologize for noise. There's some construction
No,
happening
that's
right
okay.
here.
That's okay. Yeah, I think that's an important point. Um, what I want to ask you is for anyone listening to this who maybe they're thinking about, they have a rental property, they have some money in the stock market, but they don't really pay attention to how they should position themselves or invest for the next 10 years. What would be like the simplest piece of advice? Would it be getting more education? Just investing in your own knowledge and education, or would it be a specific investment to think of? What would you say to someone listening to this, maybe driving in their car, they're thinking about getting their first rental property, if they can save up for it, maybe they have something in the stock market. What would be their next move for the next 10 years?
Yeah, I think one is make sure you're able to get incomes doing things you like to do. That's number one. And that could either be concentrating on a profession that earns well or diversifying. You can have a day job and you can have a side hustle. So there are different ways to do it depending on how you want to approach it. And then another aspect of that is I think having a basic understanding of global macro. And that sounds intimidating, but for example, I try to put it in plain English, and that's been part of why the website's been successful. Is I try to take complex subjects and just kind of teach it like I would at a high school level, and I learn along the way doing that. And it's funny because I even get like institutional investment managers that say I like your article because it's in plain
Yeah, yeah.
English. Like
It makes sense. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And the reason I say that, so there's like quotes from like Warren Buffett and others, and like or like Peter Lynch that say like any second I spent on macro was too much. But that's often because they were in this like this period of
Mhm.
kind of one, American exceptionalism, and two, structurally lower and lower and lower interest rates. So assets
Forever.
just keep
Yeah.
going up, and you're like, well, why would I care about macros? The stocks go up, real estate goes up, everything goes up. So as long as you stick to a couple developed markets, things just go up all the time. Why would you spend
Yeah.
any time on global macro? And the catch there, and I think part of what caught people off guard this these past couple years, aside from obvious kind of like extreme events, is that they just weren't students of history. And I do think that, both financially, socially, politically, it's important to be a student of history to a degree, right? So not everyone has time to be, one of the same, an expert in history. But I think global macro and history are in some ways kind of the same thing. And so that's why even if you're not super into finance, it's worth understanding. So I think it's worth every person understanding the long-term debt cycle, credit cycles, kind of what money is shifting. What is a global reserve? Like, when sovereign countries have foreign reserves, what does that mean? I think those things are worth knowing because these are things that underpin what we consider money and how markets work and how, geopolitics work and how domestic politics work. It's all interlinked, and how kind of social movements change and how they can be periods of extremes on the right or the left. And so it all ties together. And so one of my pieces of advice would be to understand, at least on the basic level, global macro, because I think we're in a decade where global macro matters.
Yeah, it gives you context for what's going on. Lyn, I just want to give everybody the best place to find you. And I want to thank you. I've said this before to you. I just really want to thank you for the work that you're doing. We share your work. The charts that you put together are just incredible for giving people an illustration of, what is going on in the world. I love the stuff that you're doing. So sometimes I think when you're writing content and blog posts, you don't get that feedback. I just want you to know there's a whole bunch of us that you're impacting with your work. So thank you for what you're doing. Keep doing it. I consider myself an introvert as well. I wish I could break things down as well as you do. So it's really appreciated. Just thank you for that. And for anyone listening, Lyn's website is lynalden.com. We'll put it in the show notes. We subscribe to her free newsletter, which is amazing. Like your free newsletter, Lyn, has more good analysis in it than other stuff that we pay for. It's amazing. We also pay for your premium level stuff, which is also amazing. But if you're listening to this and you want some global macro context, Lyn's newsletters are definitely a place to go. And if you're active on Twitter, Lyn is on Twitter at Lyn Alden Contact. So it's at Lyn Alden Contact. We'll put links to that in the show notes for this as well. Yeah, and that's it, Lyn. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing all this stuff.
I appreciate that. And one thing I'll leave you with, I guess on an optimistic note, is that, in high school, my worst subject was English. I hated English. I liked math and science, and I was terrible at English and writing. And just from grinding at it for like a decade, I got decent at it, right? So I still get emails from the grammar police about, my grammar's never perfect. I'm by no means an English major. But by looking at some basic, like tutorials on how to structure online articles and then ignoring half the advice because most of them said write short articles. And I was like, well, I'm not going to do that. But like,
no, you
right.
definitely don't do that. Your What is Money article, which is amazing, by the way. I have it saved on one of my tabs. I'm like halfway through it. I was trying to get through it before today, but I'm like, wow, I cannot get through this thing. It's excellent, by the way, but you do not write short articles. No.
Yeah, it's basically a book. Basically, yeah. So I ignore the advice that I didn't want to follow, but basically by looking at some tips and then just practicing and getting feedback and keep practicing, I reached a point where I could, for whatever reason, people like to read it, right? And so it's not something I inherently had a talent in at all. And so if you keep working at something and you kind of work hard but also work smart, so look up and say, okay, go back and be self-reflective and say, okay, what am I doing right? What am I doing wrong? You can improve over time. So I would just leave it at that. That if people read my writing and they do like it, just know that I used to hate writing, right? And so it's just something you can work at over time.
I think I've noticed that about you. You will do things that really test you. I don't know if you're still practicing jujitsu at all, but also in your article, you threw yourself in the middle of Argentina, I think, for 3 weeks without knowing anyone or the language. So you seem, and writing wasn't your skill set, but you threw yourself into it. And I think that's just kind of the way to get through life. You kind of have to suffer a little bit. Like you have to suffer. Like put yourself in the jujitsu class, put yourself in the middle of Argentina. And you seem to just relentlessly do that, Lyn. You just put yourself in the middle of big topics like macro. I'm going to write about macro. I'll write these long blog posts about them until you're good at them, and which you are. So it's cool to see because I just believe in your strategy a lot. So
I appreciate that.
Thank you. Yeah. Thanks, Lyn. Thanks. Talk again soon.
Bye.